anyone out there thinks dinosaurs are cool? And what if I tell you I weaponized an innocuous 1:24 scale T-Rex plastic model with the most awesome skin texture ever and turned it into a most vicious, mad, mouth-drooling, brainwashed Dino-Board? In this episode, you're gonna find gore, an intriguing lore, and much, much more. So buckle up and harness with me the power of dinosaurs. You're watching a very personal Dino-Riders tribute, meant to be a revival and a celebration of what I believe to be one of the coolest toy concepts of all times. This is the model I originally picked for this project, a big Triceratops. Pretty cool, I think, and actually in scale with the original Dino-Riders figures. But somehow, the project never really took off. Until months later, I came across this educational toy, released by an Italian publishing company back in the 90s. A plastic T-Rex model consisting of a glow-in-the-dark skeleton that, unlike other items from the past, it has almost totally lost its glowing power, and its beautiful plastic skin. For this build, I only used the skin of the T-Rex and saved the skeleton for a future project. Same thing for the mighty Triceratops, that was also put aside for future projects. Now, I do remember having a glowing-in-the-dark T-Rex skeleton when I was in my teens, but man, this skin is something I had never seen back in the days. And it was really the skin, with its sweet sound and its cool texture, that made me want to save this bad boy from the dumpster and use it for this project. And as a matter of fact, this model was about to be thrown in the trash bin, because part of the right leg skin was broken into pieces. Putting together the skin wasn't too difficult. I carefully gave a sand to all the junction points before gluing the parts together. Sometimes the plastic parts didn't match too smoothly, maybe because of their age, or maybe they just never really matched precisely, who knows. But nothing major, really. I used the baking powder mixed with the CA glue as a gap filler, and also to make stronger bounds where needed. Only when I was almost done gluing together the skin, I noticed how the right leg of the Rexy was not only broken, but also missing a substantial portion. After gluing back together all the fragments I had, I started to think about possible ways to solve the issue.
How about using some good old epoxy resin to restore the missing portion of the leg?
How tedious would that be?
Then, while watching the construction spray foam copiously flowing out of the hollow body of the Rexy, I had the idea.
What if the Rexy had been badly injured in battle? Maybe attacked by another dinosaur? And what if, as a consequence of that, it lost a substantial portion of flesh and muscles?
Well, that way, I'd still have to model the shin bones and stuff. How boring.
What would that be then if the dinosaur was a cybernetic organism? Flesh covering a mechanical skeleton. A Dino-Borg. As you probably remember, in the Dino-Riders cartoon series, there were two different factions, the Valorians and the Rulons, fighting against each other. Both factions were somehow forced to land on a prehistoric planet Earth, still inhabited by dinosaurs. The Valorians worked with the dinosaurs as partners and communicated with them telepathically.
We mean you no harm, my huge friend.
The Rulons, on the contrary, enslaved the dinosaurs with mind-controlling brain boxes, turning them into automatons. Now, to back up my Dino-Borg idea, I felt I had to come up with my own piece of additional lore. So here it is. I imagine that at one point, a great rebellion of the dinosaurs enslaved by the Rulons took place at the Rulons' camps. In this rebellion, all the dinosaurs brainboxed by the Rulons suddenly refused to further obey their masters. A great number of Rulon warriors were brutally killed. Lord Krulos himself managed to escape by miracle. found themselves forced to face the limitation of their brain box devices, not at all as powerful as they imagined them to be, and too easily removable in battles. So they started to create powerful Dinoborgs, increasing both their physical strength and fears. And the Tyrannosaurus Rex I built in this video represents nothing less than the outcome of the Rulon's most advanced technological achievement, their ultimate weapon, the Rulon's Dinoborg. After modeling with milliput clay various chunks of flesh dangling from the severe wound, I took a break from the leg and started making the mouth. After removing the inner skeleton from the skin, I was left with an edentulous model, in desperate need of a denture. First, I made my Rexy a muscular tongue out of milliput clay. Then, I moved to the teeth. Once the Dinoborg idea took over, a regular set of Jurassic teeth for this Rexy no longer made sense to me. Inspired by this zipper, I started making the Rexy a whole set of metal teeth, carving them one by one with a squared file out of thick chunks of plastic. With a chisel, I scored shallow grooves on the frontal side to separate the one tooth from another, and then I carefully snapped the teeth one by one with pliers. The teeth would detach from one another but not fall apart, and this is due to the thinnest plastic strip I glued on the back of them right before. That way I obtained two bear trap-like dental arches I could easily adapt to the mouth of the Dinoborg.
Look at my teeny-weeny arms. Don't you like my teeny-weeny arms?
After the Great Rebellion of Dinosaurs, one of the first upgrades performed by the Rulons on their new Dinoborgs was to remove the original arms of the beast, considered weak and useless, and substitute them with 1,000 times stronger robotic arms provided with claws. I thought it would be cool to fill the gaps with some exposed wiring. I learned how messy bundles of cables are always a cool detail to look at in sci-fi builds. The actual claws were made modifying a plastic domino tile. Here, quite a bit of artisanal work was required to connect smoothly each one of the halves to the arm, and to model the teeth one by one with a squared file. Several holes found in the bionicle bits seemed to be just made to host some more electric cables. I surely had a hard time figuring out a cool way to connect the robotic arms to the body of the beast, though. After removing the original arms, I was left with two big holes in the chest. It was my man Trapjaw that suggested me I could use brown stuff to model thick metal plates to be attached right to the beast's chest. The minute I stuck them in place, though, I remember being like,
What am I doing?
they just looked like chewed bubblegums. But with patience, I managed to do something nice out of them. And now, actually, the more I look at them, the more I love them. Looking for some cool scraps to start with to make the main war mount piece, my attention was captured by two plastic bits that were once part of the chassis of a toy sports car. One in particular fit perfectly on the back of the Dino. The other bit, though, didn't make much sense in the beginning.
Let's not do that.
I imagined how all the war mounts of the next generation Dinoborgs were built by the Rulons to be nothing less than an exoskeleton, firmly connected to the cyborg skeleton of the beast by means of special pegs running through the dinosaur's skin. After gluing a second bit in place, I noticed how there were quite a few gaps that needed to be filled up with something. I tried to use textured bits where possible, because I knew part of them would still remain visible. One of the choices I'm mostly proud of is this amazing grill bit here I used to fill the gap on the very top. With only a few adjustments, really. This bit, besides its fantastic aesthetics, would have a crucial function in supporting Krulos' command tower. The Taiko toy has got side turrets with pivotal laser cannons, and I wanted my model to have those too, period. But at the time I made this statement, how to connect the side turrets to the main armor piece was still a mystery. The smartest thing to do seemed to exploit the wheel arches of the chassis and search for bits with a round shape to use as connectors for the turrets. These hemispherical bits are part of a plastic tennis trophy I won when I was in my teens. And a piece from an old headset turned out to be a perfect match for them. And, also very important, a good support to the actual connectors for the turrets, which were made using parts cut from a quite brilliant interlocking toy found at the thrift market. How can you not pick something like this if you're into scratch building?
Oh, that's impossible.
Thanks to these joints, I was able to position the turrets pretty much the way I wanted. Oops! Now, that one right there was a prototype of a side turret I made at a very early stage, soon after finding out that some ink printer cartridge lids make perfect scale seats for Dino-Riders figures. Good old Rulon's vibes. As a matter of fact, when I started this project, as far as the aesthetics of the model concerned, I really meant to go Rulons all the way. Meaning, I was determined to scratch build a war mount for the Rexy that would draw inspiration from the square-shaped harnesses of the Rulons faction, rather than the curvy, roundish armor platings so distinctive of the Valorians. But when I decided to use the sports car chassis bit for the main armor piece, I noticed how the aesthetics of the two parts highly clashed with one another. The lack of coherence between the parts was so striking, I simply couldn't bear it. Curve squared, curve squared, curve squared, curve squared. This is when I gathered a whole bunch of new bits, which in my opinion would best match the sinuous outline of the bit I used for starters. I was still determined to use the green seat, but I tried to make its squared shape less noticeable, incorporating it into an UFO toy. The UFO toy seemed to be the best option to make the main body of the side turrets. I split it in two and used two halves, one for each turret. Little shutters were just what I needed to provide the seats with some extra texture. And part of a clear plastic bowl was perfect to make shields for the turrets. More Lego Bionicle bits were used to add some cool details on both sides, along with some random greebles. I absolutely love the back turret on the original Taiko toy. It would have been a pity for my Rexy not to have one, I think. The other bit from the sports car eventually found a purpose within the build.
I said, let's not do that.
As a support for the shield of the back turret. The clear Christmas bauble I planned to use to give the shield a convex shape was put aside as soon as I found out I could do the whole job cutting out part of a plastic bottle that had just the shape I needed. Lego ball socket connectors were a great option to make a shield that can be opened at will to place a figure inside, manning the turret's laser cannons. I used another piece of the same plastic bottle, both as a reinforcement, but also to give some extra depth to the shield's dull surface. And then I used milliput clay as a gap filler, and remember being pretty pleased with the result. After all that, it was time to build the actual seat for the figure that would man the back turret laser cannons. I didn't have any original Dino-Riders seat left from my childhood to use as a template, so I made one calculating the proportions of one of the action figures I had at hand. I glued a series of half-rounded sprues on the thinnest plastic sheet ever, and then I reinforced the seat on the back with a couple of other sprues. Using the score and bend technique, I gave the seat an inclination that I thought to be most comfortable for my figures. And then I took care of the sides, gluing other sprues along the edges of the seat. Lastly, a slice cut from, the perfect T-shaped bit one could ever find was used to recreate the hook that keeps the figures in place in the original toy line. Hey, if you're digging all this, if you're getting some good old Rulons vibes from this seat, make sure you smash that like button and do consider supporting the channel by subscribing, leaving a comment and sharing this content. Thank you! Only after having all the members of the crew trying out the seat, I could finally peg it right into the back of the Rexy with a couple of thick sprues working as pins. Very detailed plastic wall plugs and balls cut off from Lego ball socket joints were used to make the actual rotating laser cannons of the turret. And we're talking here about laser cannons that, to use Rasp's words, can blast through armor plating. The laser cannons were connected to both sides of the shield with dome-shaped plastic bits ravaged from these little fellas here known as the Rollins, that you have seen me using quite a lot in my builds. I'm pretty sure we both agree on the fact that Lord Krulos' pivoting command tower is one of the coolest features of the Taiko toy. And this part turned out being so much fun to build. Among my junk, I found a series of rather interesting bits for the tower, like this toy nail that fit perfectly on top of the vent, and a clip that fit perfectly the waist of the Dino-Riders
Well, that
figures.
really was a great find.
As many of you probably remember, the Krulos tower on the Taiko toy also featured a clip to secure the figure of Krulos in place. Problem was, even though I did plan to buy a Krulos figure just for this project, at the time when I built the tower, I didn't have no Krulos figures yet. The only figure I had was Fish Face Mako, so I built the tower according to Mako's body sculpt, totally overlooking the fact that not all Dino-Riders figures have the same body sculpt. Snake Man, Hammerheads, and Ant-Man figures all share the exact same body sculpt. Lord Krulos, though, is designed a bit differently, and his waist point is a little higher than the other figures. When I eventually bought a Krulos figure, I remember being quite happy to find out that he could also be clipped on my command tower with some minor adjustments. I only had to slightly bend his knees. Please, Lord Krulos, forgive me!
Möjligt. Mina styrkor finns ju överallt. Utplåna dem allihopa nu!
Personally, I regard the original Taiko toy brain box as a very cool piece of sculpting. I really hope I succeeded in building something that doesn't look ridiculous in comparison. For starters, I picked what I believe to be a Mega Bloks brick, which I bulked out on both sides with curvy-shaped bits ravaged from a toy motorcycle. Detailed Lego Bionicle bits were chosen to build on both sides of the brain box powerful laser cannons that blast anything that moves. According to my personal piece of lore, the brain box I made for this Rexy is a next generation one, a much more powerful device when compared to old-fashioned ones, firmly connected to the dinosaur's skull by means of special pegs. The nostrils and the eyes of the creature are directly wired with the brain box in order to amplify the two most crucial senses used both for hunting and in battle: smell and sight. These next generation brain boxes are in fact so powerful that make the pupils of the creature completely dissolve, turning the creature's eyes into a yellow mush. The Underbelly Gatling-gun style laser cannon is a feature that the Taiko toy didn't have. Inspiration for this came from 1987 Moto Tyrannosaurus Rex. Leftover Lego Bionicle bits seemed to be a good choice to simulate hinges with pistons. These were secured in place with rivets made out of sprues. A differential gear case, after being upgraded with part of a corrugated pipe, became the actual laser cannon connected to the base with a pin. I then made a bundle of very thin electric cables, connected it to the lethal weapon, and made it as if it was coming out straight from the Rex's belly. And later on, I would upgrade this piece, adding electrocuting bayonets on both sides, ravaged from a guard's guide comp. Two mighty buzzsaws that cut a path of destruction with each step, as Rasp tells Krulos in episode 6 of the Dino-Riders cartoon series.
Cool.
Instead of horizontal buzzsaws like the toy, I ended up making vertical chainsaws to be secured on the Rex's shin. The actual chainsaw, supported by a detailed Lego Bionicle bit, was patiently carved tooth by tooth out of a thick chunk of plastic shaped according to the outline of the bionicle bit. The piece was designed to be pegged right into the Rex's shin, as if it was an external extension of the mechanical skeleton of the creature. I made only one of these, for the left leg, because I figured that the one on the wounded leg had been lost in battle. The Rex's body was then given a thick coat of white prime. In this step, I could proudly admire how great of a job I did in leveling out all the seam lines in between the plastic skin pieces using milliput clay. Then I started to paint the creature with yellow ochre and dark green, a color palette based on the Taiko toy box art. I also used the Bordeaux red as a transition tone in between the two. I then applied all over the Rex's body an oil wash made with burnt sienna thinned down with white spirit to smoothen out the transition between the three colors. Dabbed away the excess with a paper towel and highlighted with some dry brushing using those same yellow ochre and dark green. Welcome now to the Gore moment of the video. I came up with a homemade acrylic blood recipe mixing together Games Workshop's Mephiston red, glossy varnish and water to make a bloody mess all over the exposed machinery, cables and body tissues.
What a bloody mess.
Pretty severe injuries, this is. To make the wound look a bit more realistic, I thought I would add a few tendons still attached to the muscles and to the mechanical skeleton, using Ohu glue. I did quite a few experiments before doing this. I would make some filaments and, once dried, bulk them out with some more of the same glue. Sometimes I even did 3 or 4 passes. I found out that once they were dried, it was possible to stretch them, glue them with regular CA glue, prime them, and paint them. While experimenting with this glue, I noticed how often it would incorporate micro air bubbles in it. By the time I noticed this, I had already covered the Rex's teeth and gums with glossy varnish, and also made some drooling effect. So it didn't take me long to figure out I could use some of that same glue also to make some really nice saliva filaments all around the Rex's mouth. Cool. I found it really amusing that on the tube it says non fa fili, which is the Italian for it doesn't make filaments. Like if they were saying, when you use it, it does a clean job.
Yeah, right.
All the war mount pieces were first given a coat of black primer instead. I then used cool gray, inspired by the light gray color of the original Taiko toy, to paint all the armor plating. I also painted different areas of the harness with Games Workshop's Screamer Pink, for the sake of chromatic variation, but also to recall the pink details on the original Taiko toy.
Not quite the same pink though.
Then, with Games Workshop Lead Belcher, I painted pretty much all the mechanical components. All the plating in gray was treated with a black oil wash, very much thinned down with white spirit, while the mechanical parts were treated with a dark brown oil wash instead, to give them a dirty, oily look. Before moving to the other weathering techniques, all the pieces were given a matte varnish coat to isolate and protect the lower layers of paint. I used a pretty old, messy brush to dab black paint straight from the tube on some of the exposed edges of the armor plating, in an attempt to simulate a chipping effect. And, for the first time ever, I used a silver tip marker to highlight some other metal gear.
Thumbs up for this easy but effective technique, I say.
I then added some rust here and there, and I did so applying an orange oil color, in some occasions straight from the tube, using a brush in a really sorry state to hit all those spots which are most liable to collect rust, and in some other occasions applying that same orange color but thinned down with white spirit to obtain something that could be called a rust wash, I guess. The orange paint flowed into the crevices right where it is most likely to find rust, and there it remained after dabbing up the excess with a paper towel. According to the Dino-Riders cartoon series, the Rulons set their lair on a volcanic area of a prehistoric planet Earth, and from there moved word to the Valorians. I shaped foam panels into rocks and craters and glued them onto a plywood, filled the major gaps with filler paste, and glued sand and cat litter of different size here and there. The lava into the lava pools was made using a paste of vinyl glue and sand, while the lava overflowing from the craters was entirely made with multiple passes of hot glue. I then sprayed a vibrant red all over the lava pools and the lava streams. I painted all the rocks in black, leaving most of the crevices in red, to simulate a porosity effect. And I also left some of the red paint in front of the overflowing lava pools in an attempt to simulate a glowing effect on the rocks. I used primary yellow to paint all the areas where the lava is supposed to reach the highest temperature, leaving in red the lava in direct contact with the rocks, which is supposed to be cooler. In an attempt to make the lava more realistic and visually interesting, I washed it with a mixture of Games Workshop Agrax Earthshade and glossy varnish. Much inspired by these, which are stones very rich in iron I found by the sea, I decided to perform a metal dry brush all over the rocks and the stones, using Games Workshop Rule Lord Brass. An old-fashioned brain box lays half-rusted on the ground, much like a relic from the times before the Great Rebellion of the Dinosaurs.